Welcome to Lean Into Leadership, where we lead the conversation about anything and everything leadership related. On today's episode, Allie Richards joins the show. Hey everybody, it's Brandon Skiles, and welcome to the first episode of Lean Into Leadership. I'm super excited to get this show kicked off. We got a special guest on the show, a truly remarkable individual, Allie Richards. Allie currently serves as the Assistant Director of the Leadership Institute, also holds a master's degree in counseling. How's it going, Allie?
I'm doing well, Brandon. How are you?
Super pumped that you're here. We're glad you're on the show. How do you feel to be the first guest?
I'm excited. I'm nervous, but I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation today for sure.
But the audience is super excited to hear from you today. A lot of great knowledge coming in a little bit here. So before we jump into the content side of things, I'd love for you to have the opportunity to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, tell the audience a little bit about who you are and kind of what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Brandon mentioned, Allie Richards, I serve as an assistant director for the Leadership Institute. Been in this role for about a year and a half, almost. Graduated last spring with my master's degree in school and clinical mental health counseling. Long journey, but we made it. Did my bachelor's degree here at CMU as well. So 2-time CMU alum.
We love that.
Yeah, got into my role because I was fortunate enough to have an assistantship with the Leadership Institute, and I just loved the work that I got to do through leadership programs. I loved the team. I loved the opportunities that we create and afford students here at CMU, and I wanted to stick around for a little bit longer. So now I'm here.
I love that. Again, super great to have you here. We're going to really dive into content now. We're, again, super knowledgeable in what we're about to talk about here. So we're going to talk a lot about, I think, important things, on this episode, but also on the show, hopefully, as a whole. But I think it's really important to kind of start with this topic, and I'm glad we're doing this for episode 1. And that's going to be talking about kind of self-care practices and creating healthy boundaries. That's just super important in general, but also when it comes to leadership, right? Because, I mean, as a leader, you're leading other people, right? And so you need to really be on top of your game and your kind of mental health, but also your physical health, too, to really kind of transform the people around you and kind of give them the opportunity to develop. So
For sure.
Talking a little bit about that, what really is self-care? Because I know there's some misconceptions out there. And also, too, why is it so important in general?
Ooh, these are great questions. I love when folks take a moment to pause and think about what self-care means to them, right? Because I think it looks different for all of us. Self-care is not a one-size-fits-all. Instead, it's an intentional approach to do things for your wellness, your holistic wellness, I like to say, that proactively takes care of your mind, body, and soul. So when we think about self-care, we're not just thinking about our emotional or our mental health in particular. Those are huge components, right? But we also want to think about other aspects of self-care. How are we physically taking care of our body? How are we taking care of our finances? How are we taking ownership of our space and making it suitable for us? How are we looking at the accessibility of the way we live our lives and incorporating it in a way that protects us from life stressors, from trauma, from things that happen every single day in a way that looks towards the future us. So these are things that you do proactively to care for yourself. And I love the conversation around what is self-care because there's a lot of conversation about this happening, which is so great to see. And I see a lot of young folks sort of fall into the trap of thinking, I'm practicing self-care in a way that makes sense for me when really they're self-soothing. Have you ever heard of self-soothing before?
No, you want to dive deeper into that? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, self-soothing is a reaction. So sometimes I think folks can very easily think like, oh, this is self-care, right? Like I'm going to come home, take the bubble bath. I had such a long, stressful day. Have some me time. Maybe I'm coloring, listening to relaxing music, calling a loved one. Those are forms of self-care. But when we do them in reaction to a stressor, when we do them as a result of a bad day, that is self-soothing. So self-care is really the proactive mentality, right? I have dedicated time in my schedule to protect myself, to build some resilience into my routine, and to look forward towards future me. That makes sense.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
That reframe, I haven't heard that before. And I think it's really interesting as well, as you talked about kind of self-care is kind of gaining, I guess, a little bit more steam, I guess.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I guess I don't want to say the culture, society necessarily, but just in general. Because, I mean, I remember, 5 years ago and 6 years ago, I had never heard of self-care until I really got here and got involved specifically in the Leadership Institute. I think I saw it on an application once, and I was like, what's really self-care?
Yeah.
And I had to look it up a little bit. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Because self-care, I mean, it's pretty straightforward in that way, but when you kind of look at that approach, there is a lot more deeper meaning to it than I think sometimes we put behind it. So,
yeah.
I mean, kind of going off that, you've been here for around, 5 years now or so through your assistantship and through kind of this role. And something that I think, you've done a very good job of, and something that's super important that I think kind of goes sometimes under the radar, is you've really brought that conversation, though, to the table about self-care and healthy boundaries, which we'll get to in a little bit, but with students, and really helping them transform not only their lives and their leadership development, but also those people around them. And so, a lot of student leaders are now thinking about these things maybe they weren't before because they didn't know them before they came here, or maybe again because it wasn't really talked about as much. So, they get to learn that and take that into other areas, which is affecting other people and their kind of self-care journeys. But I'm curious to know, how did your self-care journey kind of start? How did you kind of get into that kind of idea? And then also how did you kind of discover it was kind of one of your passions, I guess, to kind of help people learn?
Yeah. These are great questions. I think I fell into my self-care journey in a way that a lot of other folks do, by crashing and burning and recognizing I'm not doing things for myself. And I find that a lot of young folks that I work with, a lot of people in general, we can't think about any of this stuff without having the lens of the pandemic, right? So I think that forced slowdown for a lot of folks was like, what do I do for me?
Yeah.
What has been missing from my schedule now that I'm sitting isolated, quarantined, whatever their situation may have been? I'm recognizing I don't have things to take care of myself. And my journey, started a little bit before COVID came about, and I would argue end of my high school career, early college career, I was like, this is something that I've never put thought towards.
Right.
And I'm very much a people person. I love to be with my people, spend my time with my people, give to my people. But to do that, you have to care for yourself. And I'd kind of hit a point where it felt like a burden to do the things that I loved because I was spent. I wanted to pour into others, but I was like, I don't really feel like I have much to pour. And that's when I started to learn about this ideology of self-care. And I'm a little bit older than you. So this was before, this was being talked about on social media, or before people were just tossing around like, hey, what do you do for self-care? Seeing self-care on an application, that was unheard of when I was at this stage. So that's sort of where I found my passion in it too, because the more I started to have conversations with people around me, and the more I started to ask questions of mentors, elders in my life that I look up to about like, what do you do for yourself? And they couldn't answer. I was like, dang, I need to start having this conversation with more people. We don't know what we don't know. And if I can open this space both for myself to learn, but also for the people in my life to see like, oh, this is stuff I like, not only do I need to talk about it, maybe I should try this myself. That's what matters to me. So to have the opportunity to do some of that stuff with our students through the LI and with my colleagues and with other folks on campus is really wonderful as well, because we're talking about it so much more, which I'm so thankful for. But there are still folks that this is a new concept too. And finding ways to better that practice and to work towards a better practice every day is awesome. I just feel lucky to be a part of it.
I love that. That's a great response. Going a little bit deeper on some of the things you just mentioned too, by kind of hitting that crash or that burnout point in your life, which I think is common and through different parts of someone's life and as they transition into different things or, just develop in general. But was there like a moment, I don't know if you can maybe recall, but a moment that you knew like it was time to make that change, that like there was like a feeling or something, or was it just like a combination of things? I don't know. Like, was there anything that you can maybe like kind of speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've never really thought about the exact turning point, but thinking about the timeline in my life and kind of when I felt a big shift towards like, whoa, I'm not taking care of myself, was actually my transition to college. So my transition to CMU, my freshman year. I really did not want to be here. Like, full disclosure, I did not want to come to college. I was really wanting to take a break from school. I would have loved to take a gap year. I wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue in my life. I felt very lost, confused, vulnerable, and just like maybe I'm taking a step in the wrong direction. And that was when I started going through my first semester, definitely into my second semester as well, feeling like I don't know where to get involved. I can't find anything I'm interested in. I'm not feeling like this is home for me. That I really took a look in the mirror and was like, maybe part of the issue is the way that I'm caring for myself and my body and my brain. And through those practices, obviously I was able to find some peace, find some passion in there. I ended up where I am today for sure because of that turning point. But,
That's really cool.
yeah. What about you? Did you ever have a moment where you felt like self-care was new? I know you explained that, but like, was there a time that you were like, dang, I need to do better for myself?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think there was a moment before I kind of knew what self-care was that I definitely think if I would have known a little bit more of like how that looks like for me and had some self-awareness on that, I would have been able to navigate that situation a little bit better. I think it was my junior year of high school. I was just doing a lot, right? That's a stressful year in general for a lot of students, with that testing, which was really big back in the day. We'll call it a few years ago, pre-pandemic, we'll say. Everything was like you got to do well on your SAT or ACT kind of thing. There's a lot of pressure there. Thinking about where you want to go to college, if you're going to college, that's a big decision, right? That's what you're going to make your home for maybe the next 4 years or maybe even beyond. So a lot of pressure there. Just staying busy with athletics and school too. So I think I remember reached a point near the end of that school year in the spring where I just had a breakdown, right? I was at home, I remember, and just kind of lost it. I bottled up a lot of things. I tend to also, as a person, kind of keep things inside. I just internalize things better and I'm a reflective person that could process things. But I think it was too much, right? And I didn't ask for help, or I didn't really say anything to anyone. And it's funny, my mom, I think she actually was like, hey, is everything all right? She could kind of tell something was off. And I was like, no. And I just remember breaking down a little bit. And I just needed to kind of, again, like, look at myself kind of in the mirror a little bit, too, and just, like, reflect on what's important right now. And just take a step back on some things. And I was able to do that. It was also kind of lucky that summer kind of was right around the corner, so that kind of helped with that school part of, I guess, the stress on that. And a lot of that stuff was kind of already concluding, like, that testing and stuff like that. But so that was a moment. And that summer, I just spent a lot of time almost like just thinking about, how I wanted to make my last year of high school, what I wanted to do different, and just really thinking a little bit more about who I was as a person and where I wanted to be. Because I didn't really spend time with that as much because I was so busy doing other things. And then I think about coming to college. That transition is usually difficult for a lot of people, which is super common that first semester, whether that's because, there's so much time that you have because there's not that strict schedule that you've had for so many years, or it's because you don't know where to get involved because maybe you were doing things for so long and then you're not doing them anymore in college, whatever it may be. It's different for everyone. But yeah, at that point it was a little bit different where I needed to, reassess. I think I went off and had a little bit too much fun and got involved in too many things. And I really needed to kind of reassess what was important and find that balance and that time management. So, and then through that, I think I learned some of those self-care things that really relate to me personally. Because, obviously, self-care, right, it's different for everyone a little bit.
100%. Yeah.
But, yeah. So
I appreciate you sharing that, too, because, I think about my own journey with this stuff. And when I think about why I do the work I want to do and why I want to be in certain spaces and advocate for young folks in a certain way, it's because, like, when I think about my journey, I think about how pivotal those vulnerable moments were and me taking a hard look at, like, how do I take care of myself and how does that affect those around me? And all I can hope for is a world where this conversation is so common and so normal that young folks are empowered to advocate for themselves. And it doesn't take those moments of, like, this is just supposed to be the busiest year of my life. Of course I'm losing it a little bit, or of course I'm having a tough time because I've got exams and I'm trying to decide where to go for school. This is the peak of my athletic career. I hope that folks in the future, young people in particular, feel like this conversation is so regular and absolute and accessible that they're like, hey, like this is not normal and I shouldn't feel this way and I'm not doing enough to take care of myself. Can you help me in these ways? And for some of us, I think it sounds like maybe you share the same experience. Those turning points definitely shaped who we are. But I hope that the young folks that follow us as we do this work in higher education, or we work with folks through the Leadership Institute and other spaces, just feel like this is normal life, and I'm safe to talk about these things, and I'm safe to ask for these things.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
I think, too, sometimes we get caught up that it has to be kind of like this or that, right?
Yeah.
I have to be super involved. I have to do a lot of things, or I can totally just chill and take time off. And in reality, that's totally okay either way, right? You kind of, again, have to know who you are as a person, what your limits are. That really does come from self-awareness, right? Diving deep, trying different things, again, because it's knowing who you are. But a lot of the time, it's really that blended area in the middle, right? That gray area, finding that balance, which, again, that looks completely different from person to person. But I think that's a big kind of critical moment. And I think sometimes maybe when you are so driven or you have that limited perspective, you don't necessarily see that. And when you kind of do see that, or you find that balance in it, and unfortunately a lot of the time it is one of those moments where things are getting too much or something maybe negative happened, and you have to make that change, you almost kind of feel a little bit of liberation, I think, and just some freedom to be like, dang, like I was so caught up in these 3 things that maybe they do still really matter. But there's other ways to approach that are going to be better for me and also the people around me, right?
Yeah.
And how I kind of shape that. So,
Yeah.
Was there like any person that really like that you kind of gravitated towards that maybe even helped you kind of learn some of these things? Was it like maybe like a mentor or someone that you knew? Or was it kind of more of that self-discovery?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's a great question, because when I think back and when I think about, even today, how I practice self-care and look out for myself, there's kind of some trends there, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I was fortunate to have support from a lot of spaces. I come from a big family, so my siblings and my relatives are really important in that conversation and in that redirection of my life. And actually my school counselor, which is the motivation behind my master's degree, what really pulled me into that field, she was a huge player. And then as I progressed throughout my college experience, I had wonderful mentors come into my life. I think about Dr. Jonathan Glenn all the time, and the ways that he just empowered me to not only have these conversations with him and to be the first supervisor I ever had to say, like, I am here for you in all the ways. And if you need something, that's my position. That's what I'm here for. Yeah. That changed my world. I had never had somebody tell me in a workplace that, like, you are it. Like, you are it, and I'm invested in you. I'm choosing for you to be here with me. I've seen that in Dan Gakin as well. I see that in Dr. Dravon as well. And we're just very fortunate to have a culture here that encourages that. So it was a big old mix of my friends, my family, my mentors, adults in my life, and even my peers to just say, like, hey, we're here for you. We love you. And this is a journey that we're all on. So you're not alone in this. And
that's super cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we're hoping to have all those folks you just mentioned on the show at some point. So hopefully they're listening to this first episode, or maybe they've already, been on the show. I don't know how we're going to do this, but I think we'll get them on the show because they have so much insight to offer as well. That's awesome. I think that's awesome. Again, like you kind of mentioned, like you kind of had somewhat of a support system that you could kind of pull from different areas. And I think that's really important too, because I think sometimes we get caught up that, maybe we have that one person that we go to on for certain things, but sometimes you can get those little, I guess we'll call them nuggets or something from different people too that are around your life that maybe like spark some change in that moment that you're kind of around 100%. And kind of on that journey. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that too.
Thank you.
So you kind of talked a little bit about the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have to talk about that, right? Because it's played a huge role in the way we do things today, and it's affected everyone's life in different ways. But do you think maybe the pandemic actually helped the self-care, I guess, movement? I don't want to call it, but literally though, like those discussions, do you think that kind of accelerated that talk amongst people, or did you think it had the reverse effect?
I love this question, and I'm all about movement. Like this
Self-care
has to be a movement.
Okay.
We have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of those around us. I think, as that's a difficult time to think about for all of us. I think no matter where you are at or what stage you are at in your grief, in your experience of COVID-19, when you look back, there was a lot of harm. I do think that time in solidarity for some, I won't say for all, but for some, was very reflective when it comes to self-care and wellness. I think it was kind of, like I alluded to earlier, people had to take some hard looks in the mirror at themselves and, immediate family members, folks who might live with you, friends, whatever it may be, of what am I actually doing to take care for myself? Like now that I'm stuck here, I'm having a whole reflection moment about the way I live my life. I think that was a pretty common experience for all folks, no matter what stages you were at. And then you compile that with the grief and the loss and the trauma that was a result of the pandemic and the isolation, I feel fortunate that anyone, myself included, had the ability to pause and take stock of some of these things. Take a hard look and think, like, this is stuff we need to talk about. And I do think it opened the door for some more vulnerability amongst people. I think it opened some good conversations about how not only do you take care of yourself, but how do your identities intersect with your wellness? How do the things that make you who you are impact the way you view yourself as being worthy of self-care or worthy of support in that way? I think it opened a lot of folks' eyes to some inequities amongst mental health care and healthcare in general. So, I would say that not much good came from the pandemic, but I think a lot of us feel maybe a sense of reflection came out of that time. And for me, at least, it was great to really have those conversations more vulnerable and raw than I probably would have ever been as a result of the pandemic and sort of transitioning back into whatever this new normal is, or whatever you want to call this new normal. Yeah,
the post, hopefully, pandemic kind of world. It's really interesting too, because reflecting back on that time and also remembering things from it, which it wasn't that long ago sometimes, but it feels like it was so long ago at the same time, which is so weird. But I really feel like we saw a lot of selfishness during that time, but a lot of selflessness as well. And that was really interesting, and I think that was a little bit hard to juggle at times, because there's people that really had to, you're looking at yourself, because, like, man, you're almost is a state of fear and panic. Honestly, we had no idea what was going on, and so you're looking to take care of yourself. But then we also saw a lot of, again, people taking care of one another, and sometimes it was the same people doing both, right? And, like, I think because we had never been in a situation like that before as a collective society, and there was so much unknown, like, I think that maybe even kind of brought some of that as well, like you said, taking that hard critical look at yourself and saying, wow, like, maybe what I've been doing in my life isn't the best thing for me, or maybe also too I'm doing things that are well, and I really do miss those, and then hopefully if we get through this, that I can continue that too. Which, I mean, I think that has also probably attributed to, we're seeing a lot of worker shortages in a lot of places, and I think a lot of people realized that maybe that job that they had, or their career, they didn't actually really enjoy, and it seemed a little bit scary to kind of do something they enjoyed or to take that risk. But then all of a sudden this pandemic comes along, and, like, that's one of the most scary things, like the unknown. Now, leaving your job doesn't seem as scary, right? Or trying something new, and that, I can think, kind of falls into self-care too, because people are now kind of almost like asking, hey, like, I need time for myself, right? Whether that be, working remotely, whether it be, different hours, things like that are going to best support me, and whether that's my family or, personally, which I think is really interesting too. So I think that really kind of has really changed society in a lot of things. And I also think that's one of those kind of positive things, is people were, while there was a lot of grief and negativities through that time, that was one of those things that people, again, had the opportunity to really look at themselves, find out a little bit more of who they are, and hopefully have, gone on a more positive journey through not just their self-care, but through everything too. So.
Yeah. When I think, you hit it exactly on the head when you said it feels like yesterday, but also so long ago, because I feel like we have such a loss of time as a result of that. I think the collective trauma that we experience and in the various experiences that folks had during quarantine and isolation, if they were afforded such a luxury to take care of themselves in that way, people have completely shifted their priorities. Like you talked about, like, folks in employment, right? That's a huge area where we see people saying, like, these do not meet to my quality of life standards, and I'm not willing to, if they're fortunate enough or privileged enough to say so, I'm not willing to take a position that does not help me prioritize what I need to prioritize. And just the empowerment that came from, I spent so long taking that hard look in the mirror and recognizing what was important to me, that I'm not going to move forward in this world, a world that I would argue is still in a very tense political climate, especially here in the U.S. Having some tough conversations about the inequities we face. And, I mean, if you think about the last 4 years in general, it's just been tough. Like, it's been really tough to be a human. And so it is good to see people in general, but I especially appreciate the spirit of the folks that I get to interact with here at CMU, saying like, I know exactly what I want for myself. And I spent so long putting thought into this, partially as a product of the state of the world, and also because of just what I've learned and how I've grown myself.
Right.
This is what I'm willing to say yes to. And all of these things are on my list of no's. Like, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to take care of the people around me. I won't stand for less than. I will stand up in situations of difficulty or inequality for others. I'm just seeing that now more than ever. I think back to my time as an undergrad, we were not doing this stuff.
Yeah.
I feel so just amazed by these students and the things that they're willing to do to support one another and stand up for each other. And you know, I think particularly around that time of the tragedy at Michigan State, the way that our student body came together and took care of one another, that was a sense of community that I don't think a lot of us had felt since pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And folks really recognizing grief, recognizing loss and trauma, and just supporting one another in ways that I haven't seen in a very long time or felt in a very long time. And it appeared our student body felt that as well. So these conversations are just showing up in more and more spaces, and folks are saying no to the stuff that they don't need and are willing to move forward in their lives with being okay with a no. And that's something, you know, I'm very, very blessed to see in our students today, for sure. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
So kind of going off of, there's a lot of conversations happening, a lot more, which is great. You know, a lot of discussions as well.
Yeah.
What are some actionable steps that you might have that students can do to maybe, you know, find out things that could help them, you know, with self-care or building even self-awareness? Again, it's going to look a little bit different for everybody because everyone has different needs and also has different interests as well. But is there any, like, maybe some generic advice you could maybe give to the audience that's maybe looking to say, hey, you know, maybe this is something I haven't really thought about before? Is there any activities or exercises I can do to maybe discover these things or anything like that?
Yeah. I love this question because it seems so overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, when you first try and figure out what to do to to fill your cup and take care of yourself, it's like there's so many things. And I think as a result of having more of these conversations, people are like, everybody does such cool things. Why can't I have time for that? And I like to remind folks that, like, your brain is a muscle just as your body is. You know, you don't just roll out of bed one day and decide, I'm going to become a bodybuilder, work out for 5 days, and be able to step on a stage. That's not the way your brain works either. If your physical body can't train in that way, neither can your brain. And I always like to remind folks, like, this is a journey. This is not something you just roll out of bed and you're an A+ person, 5 stars across the board for your self-care efforts. No. And I think part of beginning those first few steps is looking at, like, this is something that I hope to learn and grow in for the rest of my life, and acknowledging that what I do to take care of myself today at 25 is so different from when I was 18 and dramatically different from what I'm going to want and need at 45. So recognizing that this will evolve just as we will as humans. So starting there with some awareness about there's no end goal. You will never be the best at self-care or reach, like, the end of this, right? So going in with that open mindset, but then just starting small, starting to do things that are built into your schedule and seem easy and achievable and make sense. Maybe it's as simple as, while you drink your coffee in the morning, you take 5 minutes to practice gratitude. And maybe it's as simple as doing that before bed, if that makes more sense for you. Maybe it's picking up the phone call once a week to talk to a mentor, a supporter, a loved one, just to know that you're going to have some time set aside for yourself to fill your cup. Maybe it's hugging your loved ones. Maybe it's taking a walk in nature for 10 minutes. I think there are so many small things we can do to start to build space in our lives, and recognizing is just as well as you do that this is going to keep changing, that we're going to try stuff that's going to work great, and then we're going to try stuff and we're going to fail. It's not going to do what we need it to do for our brain and body. So recognizing that the little baby steps will take you a long way in understanding what's going to work for you for now. Yeah.
This one's kind of, I think, an interesting question that just popped in my head, actually. But when you're going through your journey, right, and again, this would be really depending on, like, the example or environment and vary from individual to individual. But, you know, let's say we're in the work environment or something, or maybe in class, and you're really pouring in a lot of time and energy and effort into something that maybe you really care about. You're working really hard, and the people around you that care about you are asking you to kind of slow down, right? Make sure you're taking care of yourself, and maybe hopefully you kind of know your limits. And like, how do you not let that kind of stop you from doing that, but also kind of appreciate that care from them? And on the flip side too, maybe you are really taking a lot of time to yourself, which again is not a horrible thing, and maybe you're not taking kind of that action on your work that maybe you should be, and people are kind of like, you need to work harder, right? And maybe that's not the correct timing or place for that either. Like, again, how do you kind of deal with those, I guess, outside perspectives and still drive home like what you need to do individually for yourself? Because I think sometimes it's really easy to get caught up, especially with those people around you that care about you. You don't want to dismiss what they're saying, but at the same time, I think as you go through this journey, hopefully you know yourself a little bit better. Do you have any tips to kind of like get through that process? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm with you 100%, because I think this is something that folks who work in higher education maybe kind of see more often or feel more often in themselves. I think this happens in a lot of fields as well, right? It's not unique to higher education to do too much or have days where you're not doing enough. But I think we have the unique aspect of pouring a lot into other folks, as with any other human services or educational field. You're there for the people, right? Most of us choose this work because we love working with others. We love pouring into others. We want to be the mentor, the guidance, the support, the friend, whatever that student or colleague may need. We're choosing the people, right? So then when you get feedback from the people, it feels kind of weird. I think when it comes to maybe doing a little bit too much and hearing voices telling you to slow down, take a step back, something I always do is take pause and kind of reflect, right? Because I'm going to be the last person to see that in myself. This is work I love. This is work I love. I choose this. It's going to probably cut me a little deep and maybe a little bit the wrong way if you tell me to slow down, because even if I recognize my boundaries and I honor those and I hold myself to those, I can still show up and from 8 to 5 probably do more and exert myself in ways that I could share with others. I could delegate, I could ask for support, and sort of get that feedback, even if it stings a little bit, to just really take a moment to reflect and think about, okay, and the boundaries I have set for myself, am I honoring those? Am I being conscientious of those? When I'm leaving work, where's my headspace? When I'm showing up to work, where's my headspace? During the day, what am I thinking, feeling, doing? And if I feel like maybe this person is just seeing a certain lens of my life or seeing just a glimpse of my day and they don't have the full picture, maybe I'd talk with them and just say, like, I appreciate you, you stopping me and telling me, are you good? Like, slow it down a little bit. But also, like, are there things that maybe I'm missing? I did some introspection, I've done some thinking, and I trust you, I value your opinion. Can you enlighten me as to what I might be missing out on? Because when I think, I definitely speak from a place of privilege when it comes to workplace. If one of my supervisors or you or one of the students I work closely with told me to take pause, I'm going to really think about that. You know me better than a lot of the folks in my life because we spent all this time together, right? So taking stock in that, but then also soliciting feedback of like, okay, what are you seeing? Because maybe I'm showing up in ways that I don't think that I am. And for them to call attention means that they have enough concern to kind of look in to me and say like, hey, are you okay? So I think I would kind of start there. But then when there are times that I feel less motivated, for me personally, that's when I try to spend more time with the folks that reinvigorate my passions and really, really kind of awaken that fuel in my belly, or that fire in my belly, I guess you could say. So calling a mentor, I always find great fulfillment in spending time with students. So maybe I just put away the email for a half hour, an hour, and I take one of my students for coffee, or I go for a walk with one of my students around campus, or I just welcome that student who happened to stop by and be like, actually, I really need a break. Come on in. Let's sit and catch up. I find that really helps me kind of find my motivation again, and just talking with them and hearing about what life is like on campus and where they're at, and even just simple stuff about like how is the residential restaurant food today, or like what'd you have for breakfast, can really just remind me like this is why I'm here, is is for these conversations, these small moments where I'm like, yes, like how lucky am I to get to spend each day with these students? Because to us, I think as professionals, what seems small can really make a huge impact for our students, and vice versa. I know they say stuff that they think is insignificant to me, and I carry it for a long time in the best ways. So I don't know. It's tricky because I think we have a really fortunate work environment.
That is very
right?
true.
Like if you called me or I called you, I think we'd be like, oh, maybe we should have a conversation about this.
Right.
But
100%. But that's also not necessarily, realistic or reality in other places too. So okay. No, that's good. Really good tips and tricks. Hopefully you're taking notes while you're watching. Just kidding. But no, seriously, good stuff. So we kind of talked a lot about how to prioritize and how to develop self-care individually. When we go into the leadership kind of aspect of this, right? Like obviously, again, like we talked about right at the beginning of the show, like this is a building block to be an effective leader because, again, especially when you're focusing on developing others around you and kind of leading them through whatever it may be, there's a lot of time and energy you're putting on hopefully those which we call followers or the people around you. And sometimes that comes at self-sacrifice, right? So again, it's important to understand where your limits are and how to take care of yourself so you can be the best leader and show up for those people and the best version of yourself in those moments. But, again, it is called self-care, but my question is, how can we focus that and how can we teach others about self-care, especially in that like leadership role, right? Besides just doing it, because again, it is kind of individualized between person to person. But again, instead of focusing like how can I get better, how can I help others around me get better at that topic, if that makes sense. Do you have any like pointers or tips or any ideas on that?
Yeah, and I love this question because working with students all the time, I can have those conversations one-on-one. But it is a lot harder to reach the masses, right? And how do you reach the masses in a college campus? Through one person spreading the word, through 5 people having a conversation, through a single registered student organization. That's how change is made. Through this podcast. Let's hope that the folks listen. But I think like my advice for folks would be open that space. So once you've reached, I always like to honor and recognize that self-care is honestly one of the most vulnerable things we talk about.
Definitely.
Mental health is definitely a personal subject, and the ability to share is not for everyone, and the ability to open that space is not for everyone. But even if we're not at that point in our journey, there are a million things we can do to show folks that we care about them doing what they need to take care of themselves without ever having to talk directly about ourselves. So I always like to remind students that sometimes it's just a simple thing of like, I'm getting the sense from this group, maybe you're at a e-board meeting, or maybe you're at main stage with a group of friends, or maybe you're at leadership safari and you're sitting with your team, whatever it may be. If you're noticing the folks around you are maybe not in the best headspace, or like there's something heavy on their mind, there are such powerful ways you can open the door for someone to share with you, for someone to take pause and take a moment to take care of themselves. Even the little things of just practicing healthy habits and making a collective effort, like, oh man, I haven't drank enough water today. I know we always talk about water intake amongst our team, but the little things like, how much water have you drank today? Or like, let's go grab a bite together. Or, I'd love to join you all to go check out main stage later, but I'm going to take 5 minutes just to collect myself, and then I'll join you. And just by being vulnerable in those ways or sharing those thoughts in those ways, you open the space for others to do that as well. I think sometimes when we talk about self-care and we talk about mental health, there's this sense that we have to share and we have to be vulnerable. We have to tell our story or talk about some of our difficulties in order to feel like that space is open to others. And that's where sometimes I encourage students to maybe think about alternate ways to sharing some of that, because that can be really personal and it's not for everyone. So what are the ways that you can think about supporting those around you without sharing yourself or soliciting someone else to share? And sometimes it's the smallest things, just like telling someone, hey, like, I would love to have this conversation with you, but I've had a stressful day. I'm going to take 10 minutes and then I'd love to catch up with you and hear how your day went. Or, someone approaches you with a conversation and maybe it's as simple as like, I've had a day today. I'm going to call a loved one, supporter, partner, friend, whatever it may be, and kind of recenter myself, ground myself a little bit, and then can we catch up, or then can we have this conversation?
Yeah.
Putting those things in place to show that you care and love for someone, but also you need that space for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does that empower you to do that again, because the more you do it and the
Right.
more you set those boundaries, the more comfortable it is, but that person's going to be like, Allie was way more attentive to me after she called so-and-so, or after she went for her 20-minute walk to who knows where. I got to do that more. I got to do that more myself and kind of be that example and show some different ways to empower those around you to care for themselves, while also like doing what you need to do to show up as the best version of a student, leader, friend, whatever it may be for those around you. And it's tough to do, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the challenge of it, right? But that's what kind of keeps you going, excites you, and brings some new, I guess, important information and knowledge along the way.
Yeah.
Going a little bit deeper on that and the aspect of, again, kind of leading that, especially in a team setting with other people, how would a leader almost kind of create that space or that environment for self-care and healthy boundaries to kind of occur? Because, again, I really like the perspective you take on, like, you know, it is a huge thing to be to share those things. It's a big, you know, you have to be vulnerable with that. And that's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But are there specific ways that maybe a leader can create that space and that culture, I guess, within a team so that they can share those things? Or, again, some of those other ways for people to kind of share, you know, how they best practice self-care or what they need.
Yeah, for sure. First thing that comes to mind is authenticity.
Yeah.
Right? You can be authentic and genuine and not have to be vulnerable. Vulnerable in the ways that feel exposing.
Yeah.
I think, you know, vulnerability is inherent to your authenticity and being genuine, being a genuine human. However, I think that's where kind of folks maybe sometimes shut down, is at the thought of like, I have to be vulnerable to get this point across. So I would encourage student leaders, I would encourage leaders in other spaces as well to just be their most authentic version of themselves. You can convey what you need and what is best for what you believe to be your team, your org, your fraternity, sorority, whatever the situation may be, and open that space to others without, again, having to go full disclosure to everyone around you, right? So that's a tricky balance to walk. That's something like I myself am still learning as well. How can I show up and be authentic and advocate for the students I support, the folks around me, and myself, without maybe telling my whole business?
Right.
So how do you make that happen? And to be honest, it's really trial and error.
Okay.
But I think leaning into that authentic side of leadership, authentic leadership is a great example of a theory that you could look into to think more about this. But just being exactly who you are, showing up as yourself every single day, sharing what you're comfortable, empowering those around you to do the same, and being a fierce advocate. One of the best ways you can open the door for others is by showing them how to open it. So
model the way, right?
Model the way.
Love that. It's interesting too, because I've definitely noticed this before, as well as more people, at least in let's say a certain environment, are sharing things that maybe are a little bit more vulnerable or personable. Then sometimes, like, again, people almost feel obligated or pressured to share as well, right? Or some people are comfortable sharing a lot of personal things that others may not be, which can obviously cause some discomfort in a group of people. But again, finding that trial and error, that balance is so critical. But how can we try to, again, create that vulnerable space, but also avoid it going into some trauma bonding, which is obviously really disastrous, toxic to a team.
Yeah.
No one really wants to get to that point, but that often, I think, can happen sometimes, especially if you don't know fully how to, again, share what you need and share and how to do that, but without oversharing. And again, that looks different for everyone, but how do you, like, kind of avoid that? Because that's, again, not good for a team.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most difficult aspects of building a mental health forward and trauma-informed space for others, especially in a leadership role, is finding that balance. Because by human nature, I think we connect through shared experience. And for us to have conversations about when things aren't so great and rosy, what are we going to talk about?
Right.
The really hard times,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And then that can so quickly turn to, oh, that was your experience. This was mine. Oh, and this was mine. And then you kind of enter that trauma bonding space. And it's difficult to say exactly perfect ways to avoid that, or maybe finite ways to kind of keep a team out of that, because there is a lot of learning and growing that can result from sharing and being vulnerable in a healthy way. But walking that line of like that healthy vulnerability and entering a space of trauma bonding can be kind of difficult. So I think just being very focused on, I think something that has worked for me anyway, I can say, is being very focused on your response to that sharing. So I always like to take pause and just thank somebody for being vulnerable and honest with me, showing up as who they are exactly in that moment, rather than directly meeting that with an experience of my own. Because this person's sharing maybe for a couple of reasons, but I'm going to assume the best and be like, all I can think is that thank you. I'm fortunate to hear this side of your story, because what an honor, right? To receive somebody's most intimate life moments, or to understand a piece of what makes someone who they are, is such a treasure. So I like to take pause and recognize that. And I think that's an effective strategy for just showing up, A, as your authentic self, as an authentic leader, but B, as someone who wants to honor and respect those around them and open space for that continued vulnerability as it's needed, without kind of infringing on, okay, now let me tell you something horrible. Me too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that might not work for everyone. And it is human nature as well to lean into like, you know, I have had the same thing happen, or I had a really similar experience. Because again, that's how we connect, is through relating. Yes. But keeping in mind that in leadership positions in particular, especially if a follower is sharing things of this nature with you, or followers are sharing amongst one another, maybe it's on a team or in an organization or whatever it may be, just encouraging that, honoring that, acknowledging that, and doing that as authentically as possible, right? Yeah. Recognizing how fortunate am I to be in a position where my team, my followers trust me enough to share with me who they are. That is such a privilege. So just leaning into that and thinking about things from that lens, and encouraging your team to do the same, model the way, right? If they see you responding in that manner, hopefully they'll do the same and see that in each other.
Love that. Again, excellent ideas, tips there. I think too, sometimes like we have to remember as well, or remind ourselves at least, like we don't have to share everything, right? We can be as open as we want and as close as we want to, right? I mean, that's anywhere, right? Whether it's in person, whether it's on social media, what you decided to share it's totally up to you, right? And so, it is the way people connect and stuff too. Like, again, sharing similar experiences and whatnot. But you do have the power, and hopefully at least, and the ability to, again, control kind of like what you want to share and put out there as well. While we're still on this topic a little bit, what happens if you're in you're in that leadership role, and your team is starting to kind of get into that more negative space on this? How can you kind of regroup that situation and get back on track, or kind of maybe diffuse that and kind of reassess or reapproach those discussions? Because maybe it is super important, and maybe they need to have those discussions as a team, but again, to do that more in a productive way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mean kind of like pulling them from maybe a space of sharing that's not as healthy.
Yeah. Like
how do bordering
you
on trauma bonding, or maybe actually trauma bonding. Okay.
Right. Like, as a leader, like, is there anything like that you could do in the moment? Because sometimes, again, like, one thing happens, and then boom, conversation happens quickly. You start to talk about things, and it could go from really a topic that was supposed to be really healthy and productive to something that could come up with conflict or difficulties, or just really, again, not where you wanted to gear that. So how do you kind of get that group back on track as a leader?
Yeah. I think this is a tricky moment, especially in a leadership role, right? Because there's something to be said about encouraging that space to stay open, keeping that line of communication open, again, honoring and just feeling thankful for someone being willing to share, especially in your presence. I think about like other positions I've had in my past, like you had those conversations when the boss leaves, right? So if you're in a leadership role and someone is sharing around you, that's an honor. Again, how lucky. But when it enters that unproductive space, I think it takes some real trial and error, some mistakes and some learning to recognize, how do I encourage this level of connectivity amongst myself and my team while keeping it in a healthy space? I don't have any good answer for this, and it's definitely not something that, is kind of one size fits all. It depends on your team, their dynamic, what exactly are they sharing, how are they going about it? The list could go on and on, but something for me that I like to do is just sort of transition as respectfully and as kindly as I can, because again, while I feel so fortunate to be a part of those conversations, I have to recognize and remember that I might be supporting somebody else in the space who's maybe not in a place to have these conversations. Even if it appears that everyone's engaging in this, how many people are really ready to receive that? Yeah. I know that there have been times in my life where people have shared with me, and while I've been thankful, I've been like, oh my gosh, I was already filled to the brim today. Right. And I love and care for this person, but this pushed me past my limit. Yeah. And now I have to sit with the knowledge that I didn't show up the way I wanted, or didn't hear things the way I wanted to, or really should have, because I was not in the headspace for that. So recognizing that in a leadership role, and this is happening around you, it might be supportive to those also present to kind of shift the conversation away, or create space for that at a later time, right? Like if it feels really uncomfortable to kind of transition as effectively as you can, maybe the best approach is like, I love this conversation and I am so thankful we're able to share with one another and be honest with one another in these ways. I do want to keep us moving forward on X, Y, Z, or whatever you may have entered that space and gone off on that tangent about. But I don't want to close the door on this conversation. I want you to know I'm more than willing to talk with you at any point. I'm here to support you. I care for you. And encouraging that amongst your teammates as well, because also recognizing that you might not be the most comfortable person to share with. So doing a little bit of both maybe is a healthy approach, but I also recognize it's trial and error, right? Yeah, there's no good way to do that. And it's always kind of difficult to transition when somebody's being vulnerable and sharing. But as a leader, you have to balance that with the needs of the team and your goals and so on and so forth.
Too, right?
Your self-care, absolutely.
It's awesome. That kind of almost segues into our next topic, which I think is perfect to get to. So let's talk a little bit more about healthy boundaries. So I think this is a big one in leadership, and I think, whether you're kind of starting your leadership journey or even you're really advanced and you've been leading for a while effectively, this can always be kind of tough, right?
Yeah.
Is establishing healthy boundaries within yourself and around the team or those people you're kind of leading or working with. So, the answer to this question is, are healthy boundaries important? Obviously, but how do they relate to leadership and why are they so important, especially when, let's say maybe a student watching right now is in that leadership role. Like, why is it important to establish those, and how can they do that?
Oof, yeah. Boundaries, I would argue, are equally as tough as self-care, but they're still doable, right? Yeah. And I think in the same way that I hope folks approach self-care with an open mind, recognizing it's a journey, entering a trial and error sort of cycle until they find something that works, I think boundaries are very similar. I think they're very hard to adjust to. And something I really try to emphasize with our leader advancement scholars or with our Safari team or the other students I had the privilege of working with is boundaries are not finite. They are not hard. They are porous and they are ever changing. However, they should all achieve a goal, right? So if there's something in your life that you recognize could benefit your own wellness so that you are able to show up as a leader, as a supporter, a partner, a friend, whatever it may be, that you don't have the ability to do without a couple of boundaries, but it will make you a better partner, friend, leader, supporter, whatever it may be, it's worth giving it a try, right? So I'll use myself as an example, like something I really like to do and I'm pretty forward about with my students and my colleagues is like, I'm not checking my email once I leave campus. If you text me or call me with a work-related question, you can text me and call me about anything. You can tell me about your dinner. You can let me know that y'all went to the park and had a nice walk. You can send me pictures of your cat, Daphne, at any time. But when you think about like stuff that is work-related, I will not respond unless I feel that it's an emergent situation,
Right.
and those are slim to none,
Yeah.
right? When I go home, I need to recharge myself
Yeah.
so that I can be my best version of a leader, my best version of a supervisor, supporter tomorrow.
You
And
say that
I
again
want
real quick for me real quick? That what you just said? Can you say that again?
be my best version of myself as a leader, supporter.
Yeah.
That part?
Yeah, or like you have to, take the time for yourself so you can be your best. Right?
Yes. Because if
Big
you're
point.
not making that space for you, how do you think you're going to show up for others, right?
Right.
And we've all had days where we've fallen short, and we feel that, like how often do you think about like, man, I remember this one time that I just did not show up the way I wanted to.
Right.
Those are the moments that stick with us.
Yep.
And I try to use those as moments for fuel when I'm feeling like I really want to honor this boundary that I've set for myself. But I also don't want my student to go without, or I also don't want my family member to go without. I think about those times where like, no, I put this in place to support me and my wellness.
Right.
This is fuel.
Yeah.
This is fuel, because I don't want to have those moments where I can't be the best version of myself as a leader, partner, supporter, friend, all the different roles that we all play, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as hard as they may be, leaning into those times where like, dang, I also know what it feels like to not set myself up for success and to prioritize my own well-being, can be tricky. And also that made it, I think the way I just described that too, made it sound so easy. Like, let me just lean into this time that I did it really bad to be better in the future. That's so much easier said than done, because we also typically set boundaries or enforce boundaries with people we love, care about, and are invested in.
Right.
And it's hard to tell people who fall into those categories in our life, like, no,
Right.
or like,
100%.
I can't.
Yes, definitely. I feel
Yeah.
like those are always the hardest ones, right?
Yeah.
People that care about you the most and that you care about the most, because again, they want to spend time with you, right? They might want to tell you how their day was, and maybe you, again, like you said a little bit earlier too, like maybe you've hit your threshold, right?
Yeah.
And how do you still be that supportive, caring person to them when you're still you need time for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I think establishing boundaries are so critical, because you can refer back to those, right, and say, hey, like, I told you about my boundaries. Like, I really hope that you're gonna respect these, and I appreciate it if you do. And like, I want to know, that you're okay, and I'll spend some time with that. But I need a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
I need some time. But of course, it is always like kind of the toughest ones, because I think sometimes with the people you care about, you're more willing to kind of maybe sacrifice your boundaries for them, or maybe they're more willing to maybe assume that they can disregard your boundaries because they know that you care about them, and that can be really tricky.
100%. And you hit on such an important part right there when you said, the piece about communicating your boundaries. These are my boundaries and why I've set them. We cannot set, enforce, and maintain healthy boundaries if we're not communicating, right? You don't get to just wake up one day and be like, Brandon, don't you dare text me after 5 p.m. That would cause harm both to yourself and to the people you support, love, and care about, right? That's why I try to remind folks, like, boundaries are not this finite thing. They're not this brick wall that you're putting up. They're going to be tested by yourself and by others. And one of the best ways we can continue to maintain them and enforce them and support our own wellness is through communication, through telling this person, like, I know it's, maybe just being vulnerable in the sense of like, I know it's difficult that I have this boundary in place, but I want to remind you that this is why, because I care about you enough to blank, or to be the version of myself that I want to be. I need to blank XYZ, whatever it may be, and being open and honest about that as much as you can. And I also think like there are some boundaries you can set without a full explanation, but communication is the piece that keeps them in place and keeps them respected and honored by others. And through that communication as well, other folks can learn strategies for their own boundaries. If I never talked with my students about don't text me after 6 o'clock at night or whatever, because I won't talk about work-related items, they would never see an example of a boundary. When they become a supervisor themselves, or when they're leading in other spaces, they wouldn't know how to do that.
Exactly.
Like, you can't run 100% of the time in those leadership roles as a partner, a supporter, a friend, because you are a human too.
Right.
And so that time to recharge yourself is what allows you to show up authentically as your whole self in those other spaces. So remembering that communication and boundaries are like hand in hand, right? Yeah. I can't have one without the other, and they support each other. So
love that.
Yeah.
So maybe a typical scenario that I think we see in students sometimes, I know I've kind of been there myself, and maybe you have as well.
Sure.
But we'll say we'll do it from a student perspective. But especially coming to college or being at college, right? You're on your own. You're in a different environment, and maybe you kind of have these new routines and boundaries kind of set in place for you. Maybe you're kind of learning about this, right? And you're really starting to implement it in your life, which hopefully you are. But then what happens when you go home, right, to your environment that you've been around for years, right? Your family, maybe your friends, some other supporting systems, and they're not used to those boundaries, right? Or they're not used to, we'll say, the new you, right? Because you probably changed a little bit when you've gone to college or that you've been here on your own, which is not a problem at all. But they're so used to kind of the you before that, or those boundaries that maybe you had before.
Yeah.
How do you deal with? Because I think this is a common occurrence, and it can be both ways too. When those people that aren't respecting your boundaries because they haven't seen them before, because they're new, and maybe you haven't had the opportunity to communicate them, or you still have, but they're not new to you, but they're new to them. Like, how do you handle that? Because I think that's a big deal, and that can be really stressful and really hard sometimes to kind of deal with.
Yeah, and this is a very multifaceted conversation, right? Because not only are you returning home with a new lens and a little bit of cognitive dissonance around this used to be my life, but now I view things and think about things so differently. I've had all these experiences that have shaped me. I think that change happens really rapidly during your university experience, right? Like,
for sure.
I think I changed more in my freshman year than I changed in all 4 years of high school, my freshman year of college anyway. So thinking about that too, like this rapid change and growth is just going to continue. So you're returning to a space where they remember you a certain way and you remember them a certain way. And those things probably are not aligning like they used to. That's hard. That's really, really hard. And what I always try to remind folks, or even myself at times, is all you can do is try to share that experience if it's safe, plant a seed if it's safe around, thanks for mentioning that friend from home, family member from home, person I know from high school, at home, whatever it may be, and sharing with them how you have grown and how things look different for you. And maybe if it's safe and comfortable, even how you yourself have shifted your perspectives. And I think that was what a lot of us maybe experienced, as we talked about earlier, and just the rapid change and controversy and conversations happening nationwide around these difficult conversations pertaining to political affiliations and inequities and access to things like mental health care, and the list goes on.
The next kind of question going into that is, I guess, when, let's say, again, like you have these boundaries that you've been setting, you've been really patient with people, maybe it's a friend, and we'll take this even from the leadership standpoint again. Leading, in college a lot of times, especially for students, you're leading your peers, right?
Yeah.
Who might be a little bit older than you, younger than you, the same age. Maybe they lead you in one organization and you're the leader in this other one, right? So like there's so many different times, and that can also, that's a very cool experience, and that's very beneficial to like learn how to lead, especially amongst your peers in general, but it also can be very challenging. So when does it come to a point as a leader, if your boundaries aren't being respected and you've communicated that it's time to maybe not totally cut someone out of your life, but maybe cut down on the time you're spending with them in a respectful way? And then I think that probably looks different for a little bit for everyone, but so again, like when is that time, like when is that appropriate to kind of do, I guess, and also to like how can you do that in a still respectful way, I guess, during that challenging time, especially as a leader?
This is a tough one for sure. I think, as you mentioned, it's going to look different for everyone, right? And I think finding the end of that rope, or experiencing like, oh, this might be the end of this relationship, friendship, partnership, whatever it may be, that's hard. That's really hard to face. So depending on the dynamic, I guess, I think, again, this is where communication and boundaries are key. Because if you have been consistently conversing with this person, reminding them of your boundaries, communicating your needs, being authentic in that way, and communicating your boundaries as well, and using them as sort of a support system, right? It's not again, it's not that brick wall, I'm shutting you out in this way, but rather it's like, these are the things that I need to do to care for myself. We've had this conversation, it feels like a few times. Maybe it's either time to prompt a conversation about like, okay, I think we're just simply not on the same page. Or maybe it's just simply one of those moments where folks grow apart and dynamics shift. And it's up to everyone to determine what the end of that line is. And I think at different stages in life, we feel like we extend more and more grace. And then there are stages where we feel like 3 strikes, you're out. And maybe that fuse is a little bit shorter depending on the environment, the situation, the individual, the relationship, whatever it may be. So really knowing, hopefully, that you have communicated what you've needed to. You've set boundaries in ways that support you in the relationship that you're trying to repair maybe. And if they're not respected and they're not cared for, I think at a certain point it's healthy and okay to say, like, we're just growing in different directions. It's not easy, but sometimes
you need to have that conversation, right? For your well-being.
For sure.
Which, again, it's very difficult, but, again, happens.
Yeah.
It's part of
it does.
Part of the life process. So,
what
are your thoughts about, real quick, about self-awareness / we'll say balance? I know those aren't necessarily the same thing, but I guess both of those within leadership, real quick. Just open-ended kind of.
Yeah, I think you have to continually evaluate, work on, and look at your self-awareness. I think, like, it gives me Johari window vibes.
Emotional intelligence, right?
Yes. I think you have, in any leadership role, I think you have to do the critical work inside, not just pertaining to work or your leadership position, but for yourself, right? That's how we continue to push ourselves to better our self-care routines, to further support our boundaries, to increase our ability to communicate with our loved ones, our partners, and then our followers in those leadership positions. I hope that folks in any leadership position who identify themselves as leaders in any capacity are always thinking about, who am I? How can I continue to grow and learn? Lifelong learning is like something that folks toss around a lot. I think folks in leadership roles and just human beings in general should always want to learn, especially about yourself, right?
For sure.
Like, you're stuck with this conscience forever.
You are.
You are. So think about it. Invest in yourself. Make the time for yourself. Whether it's looking through the lens of that leadership position and maybe doing some more of that sterile Johari window reflection, or maybe it is that conversation with loved ones and supporters about, like, I'm really looking to grow.
Yeah.
Got any feedback for me here?
For sure.
Got anything you see? Yeah. So I just hope that folks continue that. Yeah.
I love that. That feedback's so important to that self-awareness, 'cause especially, it's like ask the 3 people close to you who I really am, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do I really enjoy doing, and what are my blind spots, right? Or what are my some of my growth areas? 'Cause I guarantee those people will probably know. And and you might have to, really encourage them, be like, just give it to me straight, right? Like, I'm totally be fine with that. I just want to really learn and develop,
Tell me the
right?
truth.
Maybe that's your best friend, your roommate, a mentor, or a coworker, whatever it may be, a family member. But again, there's a lot of, I think, self-growth and development opportunity there too that can really
100%.
benefit all of those things that we've talked about so far. So one more big question we'll get to here. So, especially in college experience, so for students, I think, that are really looking to kind of, again, develop their leadership skills, also getting involved, which is so critical and so important, which we've talked about a little bit today. And we're going to encourage, obviously, that people do.
Yeah.
How can we get involved, do all these things, and, again, have great opportunities and grow, but still live the kind of the healthy lifestyle, the healthy mindset?
Yeah. Time management.
Time management?
You got
any tips for that? People
oh,
are
my gosh. Time management. Yeah. Probably the hardest part of just, I would say, being a leader, being in leadership roles, being a college student, finding that time management routine, schedule, whatever it may be that works for you is so hard. Because for a lot of us, I think we view parts of our self-care as these leadership roles. We're investing in our growth. We're investing in who we aspire to be, ways that we want to learn about ourselves. That's important to filling our cup, right? Is getting these experiences. But also important is, like, doing well academically, making sure you have time for your friends, for your family, but also for those experiences that are unique to the college life and unique to leadership roles in college. So finding that balance is so tricky. I encourage all students and all grown folk like myself,
anyone listening,
anybody listening, just keep trying. You're never going to find a perfect system, but trying is better than not. And eventually you can find a routine or something that supports you in finding whatever balance looks like for you. So balance is also going to ebb and flow, just like what you need for self-care, just like what you need to invest in yourself and grow and become more self-aware. Your boundaries, all of that stuff is an ebb and flow, right? When we talk about mental health, like none of that is stagnant.
Right.
When we think about wellness, none of that is stagnant. It's always going to change. So viewing your time management and your balance is one of those things as well. You're going to have weeks where it seems like I've got this schedule on lock. I'm good to go. I've got this time management stuff figured out. And then there are going to be weeks where you're like, how have I ever managed to keep myself afloat?
Right.
I have too much on my plate. I can't find 5 minutes for myself. I've been wearing the same pajamas to class 2 days in a row, and I have 3 assignments due and 5 discussion boards, right? Like there are those moments too where it all seems to pile up and our time management system fails us. And that's when you just make more time for that wellness as you can. You take a look at what you're doing to keep yourself balanced, to keep yourself grounded. And maybe even that's when you lean on folks for support. I think community is everything.
Yeah.
I think community is integral to who we are, who we hope to be, the ways that we care for ourselves. If we don't have folks to lean on when that balance fails us, you've got to be able to pick up the phone. You've got to be able to knock on the residence hall door down the hallway or whatever it may be. You've got to have that mentor, that friend, that partner to show up and say, I've got you and I'll help you pick up the pieces, right? Until you can get back on your feet, until you can find that balance again. So giving yourself grace when it's really great and celebrating that, and also celebrating it when, I've really taken some L's this week and I'm behind, and knowing that that's okay too. And it's going to continue to change, but as long as you're trying, keep trying, you'll find a balance that works. Yeah.
As Big Sean always says, last night took an L, but tonight I bounced back, right?
Exactly.
So
you never know when you'll hit that bounce back.
Exactly.
Keep going.
you need that. That's amazing. So, real quick, time management. Are you do you live by your Outlook calendar? Is that a huge deal?
I do. It's color coded. Yeah. Almost in a toxic way.
Yeah. Time management goes way too hard. Yeah.
Real.
That's so funny.
Yeah. But I find that, so 8 to 5, color coded, pristine, honey.
Okay.
Like it is so crisp. My personal life, shambles.
Yeah.
I do not have a routine or a
all
schedule, but that's what works for me, right? If
totally.
I can mentally prepare myself to go into the workday, to know exactly the spaces I'm going to need to show up in, what I'm going to need to do, both professionally and for my own growth, right? If I have that clear cut, I can kind of put my pieces together for my personal wellness, my personal time. I like to fly by the seat of my pants in my own life. I like to pick up and go for a hike. I like to sit by the pool and read for 6 hours and make inappropriate use of my time. Avoid the laundry, avoid the cooking, the cleaning, whatever, and just absorb myself in nature or a good book. And that's how I fill my cup. So if the rest of my life is a little bit less organized, that's fine by me. But I found that works for me.
Love
my
that.
Outlook calendars.
Color coded though. 8 to 5.
Color coded 8 to 5 every single day.
Yeah, that's so funny. So, balance, right? Again, you can be organized and disorganized at the same time. I love that. So, do you journal real quick?
I do.
Yeah. Do you ever plan out your day before, the big things you have to get done? Do you take a list or?
Yeah. See, that's a great question, because another thing I found that works for me is keeping my journaling personal, right?
Okay, yeah.
And then my scheduling, or I guess my to-dos that are work related in particular, that's all Outlook, honey. So
Outlook,
Outlook, honey, that is color coded and waiting for me at 7:59 a.m. when I roll up to work the next day. For my personal life, though, it's to-do lists for sure. It's journaling and processing in that way. In fact, my journal is half gratitude, half I forgot to do this in now I'm reflecting on, I need to get my life together. You know, like that's what works for me. But, yeah, I mean, and we all change. That all ebbs and flows. There were periods of my life too where I lived by my personal to-do list, and I had a constant checklist on my fridge, a checklist in my bathroom for all the stuff that I would think about and throw up on the walls when I was studying and balancing work and balancing relationships and friendships and roommates and all the things that you experience in college. I had very different systems then, but yeah.
Sticky notes everywhere?
Everywhere. Some reminders, some like late night thoughts like, oh my gosh, I didn't get that at the grocery store. But yeah,
love that.
It just changes all the time. Yeah.
You mentioned gratitude real quick.
Yeah.
Like in a few sentences, like how important is that? Like gratitude, showing
very
important.
Very. Quick Google search will show you. It'll boost your self-esteem. It does wonders for our brain.
Is it like do you list like 3 things you're grateful for at night, or is that like do you do it in the morning? Like how does that look for you? I mean, I've heard a bunch of different people doing different things with that, but I've heard kind of some things like it's really important to sit down and you talk about things that you're grateful for. And it can be simple things too, right? Like, man, I'm just excited. I'm pumped that, we have this technology to do this podcast, right? Or it could be something like just super pumped that I have, access to clean water, or it can go deeper, right? Like, is there like, what did you kind of like, do you have like a structure to it, or you just kind of just sit there at times and just
That's a good question. Millions of ways to express it. And I feel like gratitude has become quite the buzzword for
it really
me.
has.
Like it's blown up in the last, which I love because I try to encourage that amongst folks. It is one of the easiest ways we can care for ourselves. And it doesn't feel like self-care. And I think that's really good for some people who think like, I don't have time to invest in myself. Well, you can invest in yourself by being thankful and appreciative for those around you, right? Like that does miracles for you as it does those receiving it. So I like to approach gratitude person to person first. I like to tell folks like, I'm thankful for you. I appreciate the work you've done. I feel very lucky to work with you, know you, have you in my life, whatever it may be. And then I try to express gratitude through my journaling or even just picking up the phone once a week, calling somebody and saying, hey, I love you and I'm thankful for you. Makes them feel good. Makes me feel good.
Win-win.
It's a win-win.
Definitely.
Win-win.
That's great. I know I did this exercise once. I took a class actually during my undergrad time here. And I don't know if it's still offered. It was like the first time it was offered. It's called like Psychology of Happiness, right? And I heard about a lot about gratitude and stuff before and did different things. But we had to do an exercise. It was an assignment. So for 30 days we had to keep a gratitude journal, right? And we would write it in, and we kind of had to turn it in to prove that we did it. But let me tell you, it was game changing, right? It was really like, dang, because I remember doing that kind of like we talked about a little bit earlier that summer after when I kind of started to discover self-care when I was still in high school. I was like, I kind of found that, and it helped me a lot. And I kind of got away from it my first semester at college, and I took that class my second semester my freshman year. And I'm gonna tell you, like instantly, right? It felt so much better, and just like again, you just. I don't know, just feel like, again, happier. And again, especially if you can also then tell the people that have made a difference in your life, because I don't think we always do that. And it's the little things that really can make someone else's day, right? That or reminding them that they're important to you, too. So
goes a long way.
Love gratitude.
Same.
One piece of leadership advice to student leaders or anyone watching. What do you got? Some wisdom. You already dropped so much wisdom, but like we're going to keep pulling that out of you, right?
My advice would be keep growing as best you can. Keep investing in yourself. You are worth the time, the energy, the investment all around. Surround yourself with people who love you, care for you, and have that same investment both in themselves and you. Community is everything. Your community should support you in that journey. Your support system should uplift you always. Just never stop feeling empowered and excited to just grow and learn. And maybe it's through academics, maybe it's through just personal growth and discomfort, but keep choosing yourself, keep investing in yourself. It's a journey you'll never regret taking.
Take notes on that. Great advice. So one more thing I promised real quick. So something I want to start on this show is what we're going to do is you're going to be able to ask the next guest a question.
Ooh.
It's got to be leadership related.
Okay.
It can be anything.
Okay.
But first, since you are our first guest, we're actually going to bring a special guest. I'm going to have Mello come here. He's our show producer. Or we're going to call him like maybe like the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. I don't know.
CTO is
yeah,
nice.
A little fancy
I like
title.
That. What up, CTO?
What's
CTO. I like that.
All right, Allie. So, has there ever been a time when you were in a very difficult situation and you were the one who had to be a leader in that situation?
Ooh, so like when I'm having a tough time and I have to sort of uplift those around me?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Or if no one really has their head screwed on and no one's really knowing what goes on and they're looking for someone else
Yeah.
for the answer.
Yeah.
And like you were the one that goes, wait a minute, maybe I'm the one that needs to step in and say something or do something.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I have had that experience. I won't share the specifics. But it was during the pandemic, right? I think there was a serious sense of confusion and disarray amongst most folks. In that time, I just leaned into my humanity, like as simple as that sounds. Like, I hear you. I'm with you. I'm as lost and confused as you are.
Right.
What can we do to get through this together? I found that asking questions before offering support goes such a long way. So I just try to ask those folks, like, what can I do for you? What can I do for us in this moment? How do we get out of this together? I will claw our way to the top with you. That's what we got to do, right? Like, just remembering that there is no me without we sort of vibes. Yeah. We do. Literally, we do. Learning how to do it together, asking how you can support, leaning into leadership that way. Like, I don't have the answers for all of us, but what can we do together to make it through?
I love that.
That's a good question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Mello.
Yep. See you guys later.
Thanks for hopping in, Mello. Great question. All right, now it's your turn. What's the question you're going to ask the next guest? They're going to have to answer at the end of the show.
All right.
Let's hear it.
What has been your biggest leadership learning moment?
What has been your biggest leadership moment? Got it.
Yeah,
Listen,
learning moment.
Learning moment. I'm excited to see who we have to answer that next, but also too what their answer is going to be.
I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, real quick, Allie, where can people find you? Or are there any resources things we talked about today that maybe be accessible for students maybe online? We could probably link those in maybe the comment or the description of this video.
That's a great question. You can find me, to answer that part first, you can find me in the University Center, office number 201. I'm located pretty much right across from the bookstore, right by Starbucks. I know y'all be hitting that Starbucks line, so come through.
Dollars, right?
Use that flex. Come say hey. Come kick it in 201. It's a good place. You can get a hold of me. All of my contact information is on cmich.edu/leadership, which I believe is also linked below. Yeah. You can find my email, my phone number, and again, my office if you forget. And the resources that you mentioned, I have put together a document for folks.
Look at that. Love that.
Yeah, for sure. So on there, you'll be able to find all sorts of stuff between mental health resources from counseling to crisis lines, all the way to some activities and worksheets that you can implement to practice your boundary setting, to think about time management. Powers to the people, man. I want folks to have exactly what they need. And if you don't have what you need on there, send me an email, stop by 201, and I will be happy to find it for you if I don't already have it ready. So, I hope you take advantage of that. It'll be linked below.
Power to the people, man.
Powers to the people.
Thanks for putting that together, too. There's definitely going to be some great resources in that. Definitely checked out a few myself. So, again, Allie, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for kicking off Lean Into Leadership. That was super awesome. Again, thank you for, all the knowledge and learning throughout this episode that we got to do together. For the next steps here, I mean, like, we'll be right here next week, same time, different guest. I mean, you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a great show. And as usual, keep leading the way. Thanks, y'all.